He had everything a man could want: wealth, power, the world at his fingertips. But what he didn't know was that he'd already lost what truly mattered: his legacy, his redemption, his children. They stood there, peeking from behind the kitchen door. 3 sets of wide, curious eyes. He staggered backward. The air left his lungs. One of the boys, his eyes were unmistakable. The same stormy gray Kellen Durrell saw in the mirror every morning. And for the first time in years, the billionaire known for never cracking nearly collapsed. But before this moment, before the whispers of forgiveness and the ache of redemption, there was a choice, a bet, a betrayal, and a woman who vanished with a secret so powerful it would change everything. This is that story. Before we begin, let's center our hearts. Father, we come before you with open hearts tonight. Some of us carry wounds from betrayal, abandonment, or love lost. But in your presence, we believe that no heart is too broken to heal, and no past is too dark for your light. Teach us, through this story, that redemption is real, that change is possible, and that even in the ruins of shattered trust, you can build something beautiful. Help us to love boldly, to forgive bravely, and to never take for granted those you place in our lives. May this story speak not just to our ears, but to our souls. In Jesus' name, amen. Welcome, family. Whether it's your first time here or you've been walking this story trail with me for a while now, I'm honored to have you. Today's story is about broken trust, painful truths, and what it really means to make something right. Not with money, not with words, but with action, consistency, and humility. And I've got a question for you right up front. Have you ever been hurt by someone you trusted, and they came back years later saying they'd changed? If you've ever faced that kind of crossroads, where your heart says run, but your soul whispers wait, this story will feel close to home. If you've ever been let down by someone you loved, or if you believe that people can grow after doing wrong, go ahead and like this video, hit subscribe, and let me know in the comments, have you ever given someone a second chance? Or maybe you've been the one asking for it. Now let's go back to the beginning, to where it all started, before he was brought to his knees by truth, before she disappeared without a trace, before he ever knew he had a family worth fighting for. Let's go to the city of steel, sky, and secrets, where a man named Kellen Durrell built his empire, and unknowingly began to lose everything. Kellen Durrell didn't come from money, but he moved through the world as if he'd always owned it. He was the type of man whose presence bent the air around him. Calm, calculating, the kind of person people noticed without fully understanding why. His empire stretched across industries, from tech to real estate, but it wasn't the headlines or the awards that made him powerful. It was how detached he could be, how untouched. No one got in. No one stayed long. His relationships were like business contracts, signed, executed, and forgotten. That was until her. Alina Moreau had come to New York chasing a dream and running from a past. She carried no designer handbag, no title, just a recipe book passed down from her grandmother, and the quiet kind of strength only pain can teach. She was hired for a catering job at one of Kellen's corporate events. She hadn't expected him to notice. No one ever really did. But he did. Not because of her dress, it wasn't expensive. Not because of her voice, she spoke softly and rarely. But because of the lemon tart. For reasons he couldn't explain, it stopped him. There was something about the simplicity, the care, the balance of flavors. But it wasn't the tart, not really. It was the woman who made it. She didn't look at him with awe or fear. She didn't lean in, try to impress. She just smiled, gave a small nod, and turned back to her station. In that moment, Kellen Durrell, the man who never let anyone in, felt something shift. And for the first time in years, he wanted to know someone, not what they did, not how they could benefit him, but who they were. He didn't know her story, but he knew he wanted to. What she didn't know was that her life had just changed forever. What he didn't know was that the woman he'd set his eyes on would one day be the mother of his children, and what neither of them could have imagined was the storm that would rise between them. A choice born from pride, a lie too cruel to be undone, and the kind of love that survives the wreckage only if it's real. The city hummed beneath him. From his corner office on the 63rd floor, Kellen Durrell stood in silence, watching the sunlight reflect off towers of glass and steel. Below, taxis weaved like yellow ants, and the pulse of the city throbbed with purpose. He thrived in that rhythm, demanding, relentless, sharp-edged. His office was more museum than workspace, minimalist, immaculate, every piece carefully chosen. A marble desk, a bronze sculpture of an eagle, a single photograph on the wall, a faded picture of his father standing outside a factory with grease on his hands and pride in his eyes. Kellen had built everything from grit and hunger. There were no trust funds, no handouts, just long nights, brutal decisions, and a refusal to fail. People respected him. Some feared him. Most stayed out of his way. That was how he liked it. His phone buzzed. "Your car is ready, Mr. Durrell." He nodded once, straightened his cufflinks, and walked out, his presence commanding even in silence. The evening's event was another high-profile function, an investor dinner to celebrate a new merger. He didn't care for speeches or clinking glasses, but appearances mattered. Power required performance, and no one played the role better than Kellen Durrell. As he stepped into the back of the black car waiting downstairs, his mind was already moving, thinking through, pending deals, monitoring market shifts, calculating who needed pressure and who needed silence. Every interaction was a strategy, every smile a shield, but not far from where the high-rises gave way to old brick buildings and flickering street lamps, Alina Moreau was tying, her apron behind her back, smoothing down a borrowed black blouse that was just a little too tight across the shoulders. The sleeves were rolled, the collar slightly stained with sugar dust she hadn't noticed. Her curls were pinned back messily, and her shoes, though polished, were beginning to pinch. She had arrived in New York with 2 suitcases and a handful of recipes scribbled on flour-speckled index cards. The past was a closed door behind her. New Orleans had left its scars, and she had no plans to open that chapter again. This was her restart. Quiet, honest, and hers. She had no idea the catering job she'd picked up to cover next month's rent would lead her to him. The venue was sleek, an open-floor penthouse with towering windows and polished floors that caught reflections like mirrors. She moved quickly, refilling platters, checking labels, arranging napkins just right. It wasn't glamorous, but she took pride in small details. A properly layered pastry, a tart that held its shape when cut, a touch of cinnamon in a dish that needed warmth. She had just placed the final lemon tart onto the silver tray when she felt it, eyes on her. Kellen stood across the room, untouched champagne glass in hand, his gaze steady. He'd noticed her. Not the designer-draped socialites in the crowd, not the executives hovering around him like planets orbiting a sun. Her. She looked away quickly, focusing on rearranging a spoon. But her heart picked up, just enough for her to feel it. She'd worked events like this before. No one ever noticed the staff. That was part of the job, being invisible. But this man saw everything. When Kellen approached the dessert table, it wasn't with any announcement or need to impress. He reached for the lemon tart she had just placed down, took one bite, stilled, then he looked at her. "You made this?" His voice was low, even. Alina nodded, unsure if she should speak. He studied her, not with arrogance, but with an intensity that made her shift her weight. "It's not just good, it's precise." She managed a small smile. "Thank you. What's your name?" "Alina." He repeated it once, like trying it on for size, then nodded and walked away. No flirtation, no pretense, just a brief collision in a room full of noise, but Alina felt it long after he disappeared into the crowd. So did he. He didn't usually remember names. Faces blurred together after enough handshakes and charity auctions, but hers stuck. Alina. Even the sound of it had stayed with him, long after the room had emptied and the last glass had been cleared. Kellen didn't believe in distractions. Feelings got in the way of results. But that night, as he stood in front of his window with the city lights flickering beneath him, he found himself thinking about cinnamon, about quiet eyes, about a woman who hadn't tried to charm him, and maybe that's why she had. He made a note to ask his assistant who had catered the evening. The next day, her name came up without effort. He stared at the digital file on his screen. Alina Moreau, pastry consultant, freelance, New Orleans background, no formal culinary school, self-trained. The brief listed ingredients, references, work history, but it told him nothing of who she was. He scrolled back to her photo. There was nothing extraordinary, and yet there was. A week passed before their next meeting. He showed up at a small tasting event she'd been hired to cater, one he had no real reason to attend. His assistant raised an eyebrow when he insisted on going. He didn't explain. He never did. Alina was surprised to see him. He could tell by the way she almost dropped her serving tongs. But she didn't blush or giggle or rush over like others might. She offered a polite greeting, then returned to setting up her display. He waited until the crowd had thinned. "You're consistent," he said, holding a delicate tart between his fingers. She glanced over. Consistency matters, in pastry. In people, too. She raised an eyebrow. "Does it?" He gave a slight nod. Rare thing. A pause stretched between them. Comfortable, somehow. "I liked your lemon tart," he added. She smirked. "I remember. What else do you make?" She listed a few items. Apple galettes, lavender shortbread, a chocolate mousse she rarely offered. "And what do you dream about making?" Alina hesitated. No one had ever asked her that. She looked down at her hands, then answered softly. "Something simple, pure. Nothing that hides behind presentation. Just flavor that feels honest." He said nothing, but her words landed somewhere unexpected. Their conversations were brief at first, spread over quiet moments when she was on break or packing up. But each time, something grew. She never asked what he did, though she clearly knew. He never pressed her to impress him. It felt, strangely, like peace. Kellen had never invited anyone into his personal space without calculation. But one night, after a board meeting, he sent a car with no explanation and waited. Alina arrived, cautious but curious. His penthouse was a world she didn't understand. Marble floors, endless ceilings, a view that stretched across the skyline like something out of a dream. But he didn't try to impress her. He offered tea, not champagne. A quiet corner by the fire, not the grand piano room. They talked for hours, about childhood, about silence, about what it meant to rebuild. He didn't tell her much about his rise. She didn't ask. Instead, they shared the kind of words people say for after midnight. She told him about a brother she lost. He told her how it felt to be surrounded by people and still feel alone. When she left that night, he walked her to the elevator. As the doors closed between them, he felt something strange, something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Warmth. Alina lingered in his thoughts the next day, and the next. He didn't try to control it. For once, he didn't want to. The connection between them wasn't fast or loud. It was quiet, steady, like water wearing down stone, one drop at a time. But Kellen Durrell was still who he was. Powerful, proud, guarded, and what neither of them knew yet was that behind the gentleness blooming between them, a secret waited, one that had started not with affection, but with pride. The room was thick with expensive smoke and louder laughter. Leather chairs creaked as men leaned back, drinks in hand, bragging about wins, financial, personal, and otherwise. It wasn't a place where real emotions lived. Just sharp tongues, sharper suits, and the constant desire to outdo one another. Kellen sat near the back, untouched whiskey on the table beside him. He didn't need the approval of the men around him, but sometimes he let them think he did. It made things easier, predictable. Across from him, Donovan Blake, an old rival from boarding school days, turned hedge fund darling, tapped ash into a crystal tray and grinned. "You've built an empire, Durrell," he said, "but you've got no game." Kellen didn't look up. "You sound bored, Donovan." "I'm entertained," he replied, "watching you dodge connection like it's a lawsuit." Someone else chimed in. "He's got the money, the cars, the real estate, but never seen him with a woman more than twice. Maybe he's incapable." Kellen leaned back. His silence only added fuel. "Tell you what," Donovan continued, clearly enjoying himself. "Pick someone, not a socialite, not a model, someone real, someone who'd never stand a chance in this world. Make her fall for you. Let her believe she's your whole world. Then walk." A low chuckle passed around the circle. It was disgusting, but Kellen didn't flinch. "You think I need to prove something to you?" he asked, his voice even. Donovan smiled wider. "No, but your pride might—" That was the hook. Pride, not attraction, not curiosity, just the deep old heat that rises when you feel someone doubting what you're capable of. Kellen didn't answer right away. He didn't smirk or toast or laugh it off, but something had shifted behind his eyes. 2 nights later, he found her again, Alina. She was working at a farmer's market on the edge of the city, serving warm pastries from behind a small table. Her apron was dusted with flour, her cheeks flushed from the cold. He walked up and bought 2 items, said nothing, just watched her hands move, her eyes flicker with quiet focus. The next day, flowers were delivered to the cafe she occasionally baked for. No note, just white peonies. The day after that, he waited outside her building, not in a flashy car but on foot, a coat buttoned tight, holding 2 cups of coffee. She laughed when she saw him. Do billionaires usually stalk pastry chefs? He handed her the coffee. Only the ones who make citrus tarts that haunt them. She blushed. That's oddly poetic for you. He tilted his head. You think you know me already? No, but you seem like someone who rarely chases. He smiled. Maybe I've been missing out. He planned the next few weeks carefully, thoughtfully. He didn't rush. He didn't pressure. He showed up when she didn't expect him and stayed just long enough to leave her smiling. He asked questions about her past, her baking, her favorite smells, the places she wanted to see. He listened, and she, slowly, began to lean in. They started meeting once a week, then twice, walks through small parks, dinners in quiet places where she could feel comfortable. He found ways to bring her out of her guarded shell, soft praise, shared silence, brief touches that didn't ask for more. Alina wasn't naive, but she also wasn't used to being seen. Kellen gave her his attention like it cost him nothing, and she, after resisting, started to believe it meant something. She invited him into her world, introduced him to her neighbor, her favorite bookstore, the bakery that reminded her of home. He, in turn, gave her his time. What she didn't know was that time, for him, had a scoreboard. Every compliment, every shared laugh, every moment she fell deeper into his world. There was a point tallied in the back of his mind. He told himself it was just strategy, a way to win, nothing more, until one night she fell asleep next to him, her head on his shoulder, a book still open in her lap, and he sat there, still as stone, staring down at her, feeling something that didn't belong to the bet. He told himself it was working. Alina was letting her guard down. Her smile came quicker now. She reached for his hand without hesitation. Sometimes, when she laughed, she leaned into him without realizing it. Kellen knew what that meant. She trusted him. She was falling. It should have satisfied him. He should have felt the quiet thrill of completion, the check mark, the win. Instead, he found himself hesitating more, taking longer to respond, watching her more closely than the game required. He noticed how she hummed when she stirred cream into her coffee, how she always tapped the rim of her teacup twice before taking the first sip, how she read the back of every cereal box, even though she never bought any. None of it was relevant. None of it should have mattered, but he remembered all of it. One evening, they were sitting on a bench in a quiet garden behind a local museum. The moon hung low, and her head rested on his chest. She was telling him a story about her childhood, about late nights spent baking with her grandmother and how certain smells brought her right back to those small, joyful hours. He barely heard the end of the story. He was too busy fighting the discomfort rising in his chest, because somewhere in all the pretending, something had shifted without his permission. This wasn't strategy anymore. He cared, and it terrified him. Still, he couldn't let go of the game. Not yet. Not when he had come this far. So, on the night he planned to mark it done, he brought her to the rooftop of one of his buildings. A private space filled with string lights and music soft enough to vanish into the wind. He didn't go overboard. She didn't like extravagance. He wore no tie. He brought her favorite pastries instead of caviar. She looked beautiful, standing there in a simple dress, the city stretching behind her. And when she turned toward him and smiled, he felt something catch inside his throat, but he buried it. He kissed her that night like it meant something, held her like it was real, and when she whispered that she'd never trusted anyone this quickly before, he didn't say a word. He just kissed her again and let her believe he was worthy of it. That was the moment. That was the win. But when he returned home, silence greeted him. He poured a drink and stood in front of the window that usually brought him peace. This time, it felt hollow. The drink sat untouched. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt unsure. He could still hear her laughter, the way she had told him about her fear of heights, then clutched his hand at the railing. The way she had believed in him, really believed, not because of who he was on paper, but because of who he had let her see. He thought about telling Donovan, about calling and closing the loop, about watching his reaction when he confirmed that yes, even Kellen Durrell could conquer hearts if he wanted to. But he didn't make the call. He sat in the dark for a long time instead. What he had started for pride now tangled in questions he didn't want to answer. Because what if he had ruined something real? What if the lie he began to win a game had become the one thing that could undo him? They say people make mistakes. But what if the mistake wasn't just one bad choice? What if it was pretending to feel nothing, only to realize too late that something real was there all along? Would you forgive someone who hurt you this deeply if they proved they changed? Let me know in the comments. The rooftop buzzed with low conversation, clinking glasses and music soft enough not to interrupt bragging. String lights swayed in the breeze. Kellen stood near the bar, jacket off, collar relaxed, a rare smile on his face. It had been 2 months since the rooftop date with Alina. 2 months since she had fully, quietly given him her trust. Now she stood just beyond the glass doors, laughing with 2 of his colleagues' wives, holding a sparkling drink she hadn't touched. She wore soft peach silk that caught the light each time she moved. Even surrounded by wealth and pedigree, she stood out, not because she tried, but because she didn't. She glanced over at him once. He smiled. She smiled back, and then turned as Donovan approached. Kellen's stomach turned slightly at the sight of him. Donovan's charm was always loud, always just a little too sharp around the edges. Alina had only met him once, in passing. She didn't know. Donovan waved his drink as he passed the group of women. His steps were just slightly unsteady, his words louder than the rest. "Well, look at him," Donovan said, nodding toward Kellen. Who would have thought he'd actually go through with it? Real Cinderella story, right? The women blinked. Alina's smile faltered. Donovan kept going, unaware. "She's got no clue, does she?" He chuckled. "You know it was all a dare? I mean, come on, he could have picked anyone. He chose a pastry chef with a rent-controlled apartment and flour on her shoes." The women glanced at each other, uncomfortable now. But Donovan didn't notice, or didn't care. Bet him he couldn't get her to fall. He didn't even flinch, cold as ever. "That's Durrell." Alina didn't move, didn't speak, didn't drop her glass. She just stood still. The women around her fell quiet. One gently touched her arm, as if to pull her out of whatever shock had frozen her in place. But she didn't respond. Donovan had already moved on to another group. She placed the untouched drink on the nearest table, turned, and walked toward the exit. Not a word, not a goodbye. Her steps were steady. Her heart was not. Down the stairs, out the door, into the night. She kept walking. She didn't even know where she was going, just that she had to leave. Her chest felt too tight, her hands too numb. The cold night air burned her lungs, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Crying would have meant accepting it. And right now, she needed to move. 23 blocks later, she sat down on a bench and stared straight ahead. No one around her knew what had just collapsed. He had planned her heartbreak. He had chosen her like a mark. It had all been part of a joke. She thought of every moment, every word, the quiet dinners, the nights spent wrapped in each other's warmth, the way he had memorized the name of her childhood dog, the way he had called her his piece. None of it had been real, or had it. That was the part that hurt the most. She didn't know anymore. She stayed on that bench for hours, long after her phone had buzzed with messages, long after the streetlights turned off and the city began to sleep. By the time she returned to her apartment, it was almost dawn. She didn't pack much. She didn't leave a note, just grabbed what she needed, stuffed it into a suitcase, and left her key on the counter. She never looked back. Kellen noticed something was wrong the moment he woke up. He reached for her, but the bed beside him was cold. He checked his phone. No messages. Her shoes were gone from the door, her coat missing from the hook. His chest tightened. He told himself, maybe she had an early shift. Maybe she'd left quietly to not wake him. That was something she'd do, always trying to be thoughtful. But hours passed. He called, straight to voicemail. He sent a message. No reply. By noon, he called the cafe she sometimes worked at. She didn't come in, the manager said. He checked her apartment. Empty. The neighbors hadn't seen her. Her mailbox was still full. A quiet panic began to build, layered beneath the confusion. He sent someone from his team to check hospitals. Nothing. No accidents reported. No admissions under her name. By nightfall, his calm had cracked. The next morning, he called in a private investigator. Start with every address she's used. Check travel records. I want flight data, train manifests, ride service activity, anything. I don't care what it costs. The investigator nodded, expression tight. Is there a reason you think she left on her own? Kellen didn't answer, because part of him knew it had something to do with Donovan, with that party. A terrible guess formed in his mind, and it didn't take long to confirm it. One of the guests pulled him aside the next day. That friend of yours, Donovan, he said some things, loud enough for people to hear, about a challenge. The man looked uncomfortable even saying it. She was there when he said it. Kellen's stomach dropped. That night, he sat alone in his penthouse, the quiet pressing against him like a weight. It made sense now, why she hadn't called, why she left without taking anything more than the essentials. No note, no confrontation, just absence. She didn't want explanations. She didn't want apologies. She wanted distance. Days turned into weeks. The investigator came back, empty-handed. She covered her trail, he said. She didn't use her phone, didn't take her bank card. There are no recent employment records. It's like she disappeared. Kellen paid double the fee and told him to keep looking. But the leads stopped coming. No one knew where she had gone. He started waking up at night, heart racing, convinced he'd hear her voice. Sometimes he thought he caught the scent of her baking in a place it didn't belong. Memory played tricks. Everywhere he looked, something reminded him of her. A jar of honey she left in the kitchen. A book she forgot on the nightstand. Her hair tie, left on the sink. But nothing haunted him more than the small box he found 2 weeks later. It had fallen behind the dresser. He only noticed it when trying to clear the room of things that still held her presence. At first he thought it was a jewelry case. But when he opened it, he stilled. Inside was a test, positive. He stared at it for a long time, his mind frozen. Pregnant. She had been pregnant. And she never told him. He sat down on the edge of the bed and held the box in his hand like it weighed more than it should have. A part of him had known something was missing. Now he knew what. Not just her, not just the chance to make things right, but a child, a life, maybe more than one. He placed the test back in the box, closed the lid gently, and stared out the window, where the skyline blinked in the distance. For the first time in years, Kellen Durrell had no idea what to do. She arrived in Vermont just before winter took hold. No one asked where she came from. Small towns didn't move like cities. People gave space before they gave attention. She paid 2 months' rent in advance for a creaky 2-bedroom cottage on the edge of a forest trail. The windows were thin, the heater needed coaxing, and the floorboards groaned like they were telling secrets. But it was quiet, safe, hers. She registered under a new name, Elena Monroe. Close enough to feel familiar, far enough to be unreachable. Her belly was already showing. The local clinic confirmed what she'd quietly suspected for weeks. Triplets. She left the office that day with trembling hands and a hollow ache behind her ribs. It should have been a moment of joy, but joy felt like something from a lifetime ago. Still, she didn't cry. There was no room for that now. She began each day with purpose. Mornings were spent baking bread and packing orders for a nearby cafe that took a chance on her. Afternoons she worked shifts at a nearby inn, changing sheets, wiping windows, scrubbing bathrooms with a kind of steady calm. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough. Her body grew heavier, slower, but she kept moving. On cold nights, she'd sit by the fire and rub her stomach, whispering to the children growing inside her. She didn't talk about the past, just the future, the one she would fight to build. The delivery came early. 2 boys, 1 girl. She named them Lior, Mirena, and a third name she almost couldn't say aloud. The name reminded her of another life, one that still lived in fragments in her memory. But she spoke it anyway. She called him Elias. Their cries filled the small cottage like music. For the first time in months, something inside her softened. The nurses said she handled the birth with a kind of quiet bravery they didn't often see. She smiled and said nothing. The nights were long. Feedings blurred into dawn. She rocked them one by one, sometimes singing old lullabies she hadn't remembered she knew. Other nights she sat in silence, listening to the sound of their breath. There were moments she thought of Kellen, the shape of his voice, the weight of what he never knew. But she pushed those thoughts aside. They didn't serve her here. They didn't serve her children. He would never know them, and they would never need him. 3 years passed like pages turning in a worn book. The cottage grew louder with life. Lior, always curious, was the first to speak. Mirena followed with a quiet grace that mirrored her mother's calm. Elias was the one who made her laugh when she hadn't even realized she needed to. They didn't ask about a father. Not yet. To them, she was everything. She walked them to the nearby library every Saturday, holding their small hands wrapped in mismatched mittens. On Sundays, they helped her in the kitchen, dropping flowers, smashing bananas, turning dough into odd shapes that didn't quite rise the way she intended. But they ate it all with smiles. Money was always tight. She'd stretch $1 in ways no spreadsheet could explain. A bag of potatoes could become 4 different meals. She bartered when she had to, bread for firewood, cookies for used boots. Her hands stayed dry from constant washing. Her back ached from bending over cribs, counters, laundry, but she never complained. Each night, she kissed 3 foreheads and whispered a quiet promise. You'll never feel unloved. Some nights, when the silence stretched too long, she'd pull the blanket tighter around herself and stare out the window, wondering if she was strong enough to keep going. But the next morning, she always got up. She started offering custom pastries out of her kitchen. The town took notice. Locals began stopping by with small orders, birthdays, holidays, a thank you here and there. She became known not by her story, but by her consistency, her kindness, her food. The innkeeper, where she still cleaned rooms, offered her an old oven someone had left behind. It smoked a little, but it worked. Another neighbor helped her fix the front steps of the cottage before the winter ice came in. People didn't ask questions. They simply offered help, and she let them. It wasn't the life she imagined, but it was real. And in its quiet rhythm, she found something she never thought she would again: peace. One afternoon, as she folded laundry on the porch, Mirena tugged at her sleeve. Are we lucky? The little girl asked, out of nowhere. Alina looked down. Why do you ask? Mirena pointed toward her brothers, who were chasing one another with sticks. Because we have you. Alina couldn't speak for a moment. She swallowed hard, blinked slowly, then kissed her daughter's forehead. Later that night, while the children slept, she sat beside the fire with a cup of warm tea and let herself think about him again. Not the pain, not the betrayal, just the fact that somewhere out there, he was still living. Maybe he thought about her, maybe not. But that chapter was closed. There were no loose threads left for her to pull. She had created something whole from something broken, and for that, she held her head high. Her thoughts turned to the life she was building. They didn't have a father, but they would never lack love. Some people show love with grand gestures, but others show it in the small things: waking up early, working late, holding everything together when no one's watching. Share this video if you believe love means showing up, even when life is hard. 5 years had passed, but the regret never left. Kellen had grown more silent with time. Sharper in business, colder in meetings, his empire had doubled in value. But nothing touched him anymore. Not awards, not headlines, not celebrations. His penthouse still overlooked the same skyline, but the city felt different now. Emptier, like it had given him everything except the one thing he truly wanted. He had stopped sleeping through the night. There were times when he could swear he heard her voice, not clearly, just the soft memory of it drifting through his chest when the world got quiet. His search had never truly stopped. He had hired 3 different investigative teams. They all came back with nothing. No digital traces, no paper trail, not a single confirmed sighting. It was as if she had vanished into air, and maybe she had wanted it that way. Still, he never let go of the question: where did she go? Was she safe? Had she moved on? Every now and then he'd see someone on the street, a certain tilt of the head, a familiar laugh, and his heart would stutter, only to fall again. He had tried to bury the hope, but it had its own rhythm. It beat quietly beneath everything else. One afternoon, seated in a private lounge before a meeting in Boston, he reached for something to read while waiting. A staff member had placed a few magazines on the coffee table. He wasn't paying attention until his eyes froze on a page halfway open. The photo wasn't large. It was tucked in the corner of a local spotlight feature, a human interest piece about small-town businesses reviving community spaces. The image showed a woman behind a cafe counter, placing pastries into a glass display. Her face was turned slightly, her hair pulled back. But he knew. It wasn't just the shape of her profile. It was the expression. Focused, gentle, quietly tired. He stood without thinking. He memorized the town name. He didn't attend the meeting. He flew out the next morning under a different name, booking a rental car from a small regional airport. The town sat near the edge of a mountain pass, quiet and wrapped in snow. The streets were lined with stores that closed by 5, and the cafe stood at the corner, just like the article had shown. He parked across the street and waited. Inside, she moved behind the counter, wiping down the glass, adjusting labels. She was thinner, her posture a little more guarded, but it was her. There was no doubt. He couldn't move at first, just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring through the window. She was real, alive, here. He hadn't rehearsed what he'd say. He hadn't thought that far ahead. He had spent years imagining this moment, and now that it was here, he felt more afraid than he ever had. Standing in front of billion-dollar investors or negotiating contracts that shaped entire skylines. He stepped out of the car and crossed the street. The cafe door jingled softly as he entered. She looked up. Time stopped. Her hands froze mid-motion. Their eyes locked. Alina didn't move. Her eyes locked with his, disbelief tightening every muscle in her face. The air between them felt too still, like the room had been sealed off from time. Her hand slowly lowered the cloth she had been holding, resting it beside the counter, but her fingers never unclenched. He stepped forward, but just barely. No one spoke. Her breath caught in her throat. She blinked once, slowly, as if trying to be sure he was real. And Kellen, silent, tired, more undone than he'd ever let himself be, couldn't find words. 5 years of rehearsals, of regret, of imagined apologies vanished the second he saw her face again. He had imagined anger. He had imagined yelling, accusations, maybe even tears. But this silent heartbreak in her eyes, cut deeper than anything she could have screamed. Her mouth opened like she might say something. But then a small voice interrupted the moment. "Mommy." A child's voice. Then another. "Can we have the warm ones?" 3 heads peeked out from the kitchen door. 2 boys, 1 girl. All under 5. Big, round eyes, wild hair, crumbs on their sleeves. Kellen turned his head slowly, his stomach twisting. The little girl had Alina's soft jawline. One of the boys had her eyes. The other, he stopped breathing. That boy had his. The same storm-gray gaze that used to stare back at him in the mirror. His chest tightened, the walls of the cafe blurred. His knees nearly buckled under the weight of what stood in front of him. She hadn't just left. She had built a life, a whole world without him. And she had done it alone. Alina moved quickly now. She stepped around the counter and placed a hand on each of the children's shoulders, guiding them back gently without a word. Their giggles faded down the hallway. When she returned to face him, her expression was unreadable. Cold, but not cruel. Guarded. She wiped her hands on her apron. "What are you doing here?" she asked, voice low. "I didn't know," he said softly. "Not about them. That doesn't answer my question. I saw a photo in an article. I came here because I've never stopped looking for you." Alina didn't respond. Her face stayed still. Her arms folded across her chest, not in defiance, but protection. Kellen took a slow breath. "Are they?" "They're mine," she replied. "All 3. He nodded once. "I figured." Silence stretched. Alina looked down, then back at him. "This isn't your story anymore." He swallowed hard. "I know. I just needed to see you, to know you were okay. I was." Her words didn't carry rage. "Just wait." He nodded again, this time slower. "I'll go," he said. "If that's what you want." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked past him, out the window, to where the snow had started falling again. He waited. Finally, she spoke. "This place is quiet. People keep to themselves. You showing up, that changes things. I didn't come to ruin anything. Then don't stay long." He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He just looked at her once more, memorizing her face all over again, and left. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Inside the cafe, Alina stood alone. The children's voices echoed faintly in the background, and for a moment her shoulders dropped. Not from weakness, from the burden of remembering. Kellen didn't leave. The next morning he was seen clearing snow from the cafe's entrance before sunrise. No one asked him to. He just showed up, shovel in hand, moving methodically, silently. By the time Alina arrived, the walkway was dry. She said nothing. The day after that, he helped a delivery driver unload sacks of flour and sugar into the back kitchen, then stayed out of sight, sipping black coffee from a stool in the corner. He didn't ask for conversation. He didn't push for access. He just kept showing up. He rented a room above the hardware store on the next block. The owner, an older man named Carl, didn't ask questions, just handed him a key and gave him the room at a discount when Kellen offered to fix a leaky pipe and patch the cracked stair. By the end of the week, the steps had been repainted, the storefront cleaned, and Carl had quietly told Alina, "He doesn't talk much, but he works like someone trying to make peace with himself." Alina said nothing. She didn't know how to respond to the way Kellen moved through the town now, like someone hoping to stay unnoticed, but unable to help being seen. He helped at the community pantry, stacked firewood outside the church, read stories to toddlers during weekend craft hour at the library. Her children called him Mommy's helper and asked when he'd be back every time he left. He never stayed long, never crossed the invisible boundary between acceptance and intrusion. She hated how easy he made it for them to laugh around him, how he remembered Lior's favorite color, Elias's dislike of boiled carrots, and the way Mirena liked her apples sliced paper thin. Still, she kept her distance. One night, after closing, she found him fixing a loose shelf in the back pantry. He didn't say anything when she entered, just continued tightening the screws. "Why are you here?" she finally asked. He paused, stood, wiped his hands. "Because I needed to see you, and now, because I need to make things right. You can't." "I know." He didn't argue, and that, more than anything, shook her. He began leaving before she arrived in the mornings. But each day something was fixed. A broken door hinge, a cracked window pane, a creaky stool. The town noticed, but no one questioned it. Alina tried to ignore it, but healing, no matter how small, left marks, and his were everywhere. It was a cold evening. The cafe had closed early after a quiet day. Alina was in the back, wiping down the counters, when she heard the knock. Not rushed, not timid, just steady. She hesitated, then opened the door. Kellen stood outside, holding 2 mugs. She didn't invite him in, but she didn't close the door either. He offered 1 mug. "It's just tea." She took it without a word. They sat across from each other, near the fire. No music, no noise, just the low crackle of flames. He held the cup between his hands but didn't drink. "I owe you the truth," he said. She looked at him but said nothing. He exhaled, slowly. "I never meant for it to happen the way it did." Still, she stayed silent. He nodded, as if accepting the weight of her quiet. "There was a night, years ago, a group of us, Donovan, others, talking over drinks. He said I'd lost my edge, that I couldn't connect with anyone unless there was something in it for me. He dared me to prove him wrong." He paused. I accepted, not because I believed it, but because I was proud, arrogant. The fire popped softly in the space between them. "I chose you because you were the opposite of everything I'd built my life around. You were kind. You listened. You didn't want anything from me." Alina stared at the cup in her hands. He went on, voice quieter now. "It started as a game, but it didn't stay one." He looked up at her, his eyes tired, glassy. "Somewhere between your lemon tart and the way you tucked your hair behind your ear when you were nervous, I stopped pretending." Her throat tightened. "I fell for you, Alina, real and deep and terrifying, but by the time I realized it, the damage had already been done." Her voice came out soft. "And you didn't stop?" "I was scared," he said. "Scared that if I told you the truth, you'd leave. I wanted to believe I could fix it before you ever found out." She nodded slowly. "But I did." He nodded once. "Yes." She stood and walked a few steps away, needing space. Her hands trembled slightly, but she clenched them into stillness. "You let me believe it was safe," she said. "You let me fall." "I did. I gave you all of me. And you were keeping score." He didn't argue. "I carried your children alone," she said. "They cried for nights without answers. I missed meals so they wouldn't. And you," her voice broke just for a second, "you were chasing numbers while I was naming babies." Kellen's eyes welled, but he didn't dare interrupt. "I've changed," he finally said, voice raw, "but I know that doesn't erase what I did." Alina turned to face him. "You don't get to rewrite everything," she said, her voice firm. "You don't get to show up with tea and kindness and wipe away years of silence. I'm not asking you to—" He stood, set the untouched mug on the table. "I just wanted you to know the truth, not because I expect forgiveness, but because you deserved it long before I knew what it cost." She looked at him, searching for something she couldn't name, then turned away. He let the silence answer for both of them, then quietly walked out the door. The fire crackled behind her. She stood still, not angry, not broken. Kellen stayed in town, not loud, not insistent, just steady. He didn't knock on Alina's door again. He didn't ask for another conversation. Instead, he walked the quiet path between her trust and his regret, step by step, without shortcuts. The children began to expect him. It started with a book. He had left it at the cafe after a visit, an illustrated story about a fox who built a boat to cross the sea and find his way home. The next time he arrived, Mirena held it up with both hands, eyes wide. "You forgot this." He sat in the corner while she flipped through the pages, reading in slow, careful bursts. By the end of the week, he was reading to all three of them, just for a few minutes, one chapter at a time, never more than they asked, never too long. The next week, he helped them build a snowman outside the cafe. Elias insisted it needed a scarf. Lior packed the snow too hard, trying to make it perfect. Mirena drew the face with a stick, tilting it just so. Kellen never took a photo, never posted a thing, but he remembered every second. At the library, he found an old book about parenting multiples. He read it twice, took notes. No one saw that part, but it changed him. He stopped checking his phone, lost track of financial briefings. He started helping Carl with repairs on Saturdays and took over maintenance work at the inn Alina used to clean. He didn't tell anyone it was him who paid for the broken heater to be replaced. Didn't mention that the community center's roof repairs had been funded through an anonymous check. He just kept showing up. Quietly, without fanfare, the townspeople noticed. Not at first, but over time, whispers shifted. "That man's not just visiting, is he? He helped stack every log behind the church before the snow hit. Never asks for a thing in return." He hadn't set out to win favor. He had no plan, no timeline, no strategy. Just the knowledge that he had hurt someone deeply, and the desire to make sure no one ever felt that way again because of him. He saw Alina occasionally, from across the market, at the edge of the park. Sometimes she watched him, other times she looked away, but each glance lingered just a little longer than the last. He never smiled first, never waved. He let her choose when she was ready. Elias was the first to call him something different. It happened one morning as they left the library, mittened hands tugging at Kellen's coat. The boy looked up with a serious expression. "Are you my friend?" Kellen paused. "I'd like to be." Elias considered that. Okay, that was all it took. By the next week, they were asking him to come to the winter fair. He didn't sit with them, just stood at a distance, watching as they played games and chased one another through the snowdrifts. But they looked for him often, and smiled each time they found him there. Alina saw it too. From the edge of her cautious heart, she observed how they leaned into him, how he listened when they spoke, how he tied Elias's boot tighter when it came loose, how he carried Mirena on his shoulders so she could see the wooden carousel light up at night. And yet, he never assumed a role. He never claimed a title. He simply stood where they welcomed him. One afternoon, the children burst through the cafe doors with drawings in hand. "This is you," Mirena said, holding up a sketch of Kellen. His hair was uneven, his nose too big, but the eyes were familiar. Alina glanced at it, then looked at him. He didn't smile, just folded the paper like something precious and tucked it into his coat pocket. That night, she found herself staring out the window longer than usual. The next day, Carl stopped by. "You know," he said, wiping his boots, "he could have bought the whole town by now, but all he's done is fix what's broken." She didn't respond. Carl gave her a small nod. Maybe he's doing the same inside himself. Later that week, the town learned the inn, once on the brink of closure, was fully restored. The owner said it had been funded anonymously, but everyone knew, even Alina. Still, she said nothing to him, until one evening, after the cafe closed. She found herself standing across from him on the porch. He was securing the last of the wooden chairs against the wind. She watched him for a moment. "You don't talk much anymore." Kellen looked up, brushing snow from his sleeve. "Talking got me into trouble. I figured I'd let the rest speak for itself." She held his gaze. "You're not the same man," she said quietly. He didn't answer. He didn't want to say anything that would make her doubt what she just offered. She stepped back. "But I don't know if that's enough." He nodded slowly. "It doesn't have to be," he said. "I'll still be here." Alina turned, stepped inside, and closed the door. But her fingers lingered on the handle. The letter arrived in a plain envelope with foreign postage. Alina nearly tossed it aside with the rest of the afternoon mail. But something about the handwriting caught her eye. Neat, unfamiliar, intentional. She opened it slowly. Inside was an invitation, a personal offer. The Culinary Institute in Paris, one of the most respected academies in the world, was expanding a mentorship program for innovative pastry artisans. Someone had submitted her name. They had reviewed her winter collection, her apple rose tarts, her spiced honey eclairs, her lavender custards. They were offering her a year-long residency, paid, housing included, a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Alina sat in silence, reading the words again. Her heart beat faster, not with excitement at first, but fear. Her hands trembled. The idea of leaving the children, the cafe, the rhythm she'd finally built, it felt overwhelming. But underneath that, a quiet flame began to stir. This had been the dream. Years ago, before everything. She heard the children laughing in the next room. Their footsteps pounded toward her. "Mommy, can we go sledding today?" She smiled, folded the letter, and tucked it beneath the newspaper. That night, she stood by the fire and stared at it again. She didn't mention it to anyone. Not until days later, when Kellen arrived to fix a loose hinge on the back kitchen door. He had finished the task and was rinsing his hands in the sink when she spoke. "I've been offered something," she said, almost too quietly. He turned, drying his hands. "Okay, in Paris." His brow lifted, but he didn't speak. She continued. "A culinary mentorship. 1 year." He stepped closer, but kept distance between them. "You should go." Her eyes flickered with something between surprise and unease. "Just like that?" Kellen nodded. "You've earned it." She crossed her arms, more out of nervousness than defiance. "It's not simple. I have the kids, the cafe, the routine. I'll help," he said. She looked at him carefully. "I'm not saying that to change your mind about us," he added. "I'm saying it because this is your dream, and you shouldn't hesitate because of what I hope for." Silence followed. Alina searched his face. "And if I go?" He took a breath. "If there's still something between us, I'll wait." There was no plea in his voice, no begging, just quiet truth. She didn't reply, but when she looked away, her eyes shimmered. That night, while her children slept, she watched the lights outside her window flicker across snow-covered branches. She thought about who she used to be, who she was now, and the space between them. The goodbye wasn't dramatic. Alina didn't cry at the airport. The children clung to her, yes, but she had prepared them gently, told them stories about her training, promised video calls, packed notes inside their lunchboxes with hearts drawn in the corners. Kellen stood beside them, one hand on Lior's shoulder, the other resting gently on Elias's back. He didn't try to steal a final word. He didn't reach for her hand, but his eyes told her everything. She boarded the plane with a heart full of movement. The city welcomed her with its golden light and quiet refinement. Her small apartment overlooked a narrow street, and each morning she awoke to the sound of wheels turning on cobblestones and the scent of fresh bread rising from the bakery below. She worked harder than she had in years. 12-hour days, new techniques, endless critiques from a chef who never smiled but took careful notes on every plate. She studied temperature, texture, color. She learned to temper patience as precisely as chocolate. Her name was printed in the corner of the Academy's newsletter. Once, someone stopped her in a market and complimented her custard work. She should have felt proud, and she did. But pride didn't fill the empty space at night. After the first month, she began calling the children every evening at the same time. They each got 5 minutes. Lior always asked about the Eiffel Tower. Marina wanted to know about the pastries. Elias mostly asked if Kellen was still there. He was. She could hear it in the background, his voice reading stories, his laughter chasing theirs through the line. She smiled when she hung up, then stared out the window and waited for morning. Letters arrived in the mail, carefully written in pencil. Drawings of snowmen, misspelled messages. One envelope included a picture of the shelf Kellen had built for their storybooks. Another contained a photo someone had taken during a town festival. The children were holding his hands. All three of them. He hadn't sent it, but it reached her anyway. She kept it tucked inside her notebook. Seasons changed. Her skills sharpened. She was offered an extension on the program, a teaching role, a partnership opportunity. Everything she thought she once wanted stood within reach. But each offer pulled her further from what felt real. The nights grew longer. She began rewatching old videos of the children's birthdays, noticing how much they'd grown in the short time she'd been gone. Her hands knew how to create perfect pastries now, but her heart missed small, messy cookies on a chip tray made by eager little hands. One evening, she walked past the Pont des Arts and paused at the edge of the river. The lights shimmered across the surface, calm and quiet. Behind her, the sound of laughter echoed faintly from a group of tourists nearby. She held her phone in both hands, scrolled to a saved message from Elias. "Mommy, I can make scrambled eggs now." A tear slipped down her cheek before she realized it had formed. She didn't wipe it away, because that moment told her what no award could. Her dream had evolved. It wasn't just about being recognized. It was about being whole. And that part of her was waiting. Not in a kitchen lined with stars, but in a small town where someone had waited, not for permission, but for her to come back when she was ready. The restaurant was built with intention. No grand entrance, no velvet ropes, just stone walls, soft wood, and a quiet sign above the door that read, "Table." That was Kellen's idea. One word. Simple. Open. The kind of place where people sat across from one another and remembered what mattered. It had taken nearly a year to finish. He funded it privately. No press, no backers. Most of the wood was repurposed from a nearby barn. Local artisans had crafted the furniture. He hired young people from the town to train in the kitchen, offering fair wages and patient instruction. Every detail was considered, and not once did he think about how it would look on paper. He thought only of the people who would gather inside. Opening night had arrived quietly. Snow flurried lightly outside. Candles flickered inside. The room was warm, filled with neighbors and friends. People who had once looked at Kellen with hesitation now smiled at him like he belonged. Carl stood by the back wall, arms crossed, pride in his stance. The mayor gave a short welcome. Kellen kept to the side until someone tapped the mic and nodded toward him. He stepped up slowly. A silence settled across the room. He looked out at familiar faces, ones that had watched him arrive, stay, work, and change. He cleared his throat, hands resting on the podium. "I wasn't always someone who knew how to build something that lasted," he said. A few heads nodded. "But this place, this town, it taught me something I didn't expect, that healing takes time, that showing up matters, and that people don't forget kindness." He paused. "I want this space to be a thank you. To everyone who gave me room to grow." He started to step back, but something made him glance toward the entrance. And there she was, Alina, standing in the doorway framed by soft light, wearing a dark coat and holding a small hand in each of hers. The children. All three. Elias, Lior, and Mirena. For a moment everything inside the room slowed. People turned, recognizing her. Murmurs spread gently through the crowd. Kellen didn't move. He wasn't sure he could. Then she stepped forward, walked all the way to him, and took the microphone from his hand. She turned to face the crowd. Her voice was steady, low. "I've been away, for a long time, chasing something I thought I needed to find somewhere else." She looked at Kellen. "Turns out, it was always here." She glanced at the crowd, then back at him. "I'm home." The room fell silent after she spoke, not out of shock, but something else, something deeper. Everyone stood still, as if unsure how to respond to a moment that felt almost too personal to witness. Then a single pair of hands began to clap. Carl. A second later, the mayor followed. And then the room filled with the sound of applause. Not thunderous, warm, sincere. Kellen stood there, motionless, as Alina handed the mic back and stepped closer. His throat was tight. He couldn't speak. For a moment, he thought maybe he'd imagined it all, Maybe his guilt had painted this scene just to undo him. But then she looked up at him with eyes that held pain, strength, and something else. A beginning. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. A slow tear slid down his cheek. "I didn't know if you'd come back," he whispered. "I had to remember what home felt like," she said. "And who helped me build it." Their children ran to them then, no prompting needed. Elias wrapped his arms around Kellen's waist, Lior pressed into his side, and Mirena reached up and took Alina's hand. The applause softened as people stepped back, giving space. Someone quietly lit 3 more candles on a side table and placed small cups of cider in front of the children. They sat without needing to be told. Alina looked around the room, then down at her children. "They grew so much," she said. "You gave them what I never could," Kellen replied. "And still, they let me in." She looked up at him. "So did I." The rest of the evening blurred into soft conversation, shared plates, and old friends reconnecting. No one made a big show of their reunion. No one needed to. Their presence was enough. By the time the final guests left, Kellen and Alina stood at the door, side by side, saying quiet goodbyes. The children had fallen asleep in the corner booth, curled into each other like puzzle pieces. Kellen turned to her. "Whatever happens next," he said, "I won't take any of it for granted." Alina leaned her head slightly against his shoulder. "You'll earn it." "I want to." She nodded once. "I know. Some people leave and never look back. Others come home changed and ready. If you believe in second chances, if you believe that love is still worth rebuilding, comment below, "I'm home." There are moments that follow you. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet. Kellen sometimes found them in the spaces between joy, in the way Lior laughed too hard at a joke he didn't understand, in the curve of Mirena's smile when she was proud of something small, in the way Elias sat still longer than most boys his age, as if waiting for life to prove itself to him. Regret didn't disappear. It softened, but it never vanished. He still remembered the night Alina left, the quiet apartment, the untouched glass, the sharp silence that filled every inch of space. He remembered the endless searches, the way hope flickered and died again and again, the way her name echoed in the walls long after she was gone. He had built towers with his hands, but none of it had meant anything once he realized he had dismantled what truly mattered. That was the price. He missed first steps, first words, first birthdays. He missed the smell of his newborn children, the weight of them asleep on his chest, the simple joys of chaos and bedtime stories and crayon drawings taped to walls. He paid for his mistake not once, but every day he lived without them. But pain, when met with humility, can become something else. It had shaped him, made him softer, more deliberate. He didn't pretend to have earned the love they now gave him. He received it, humbly, with patience, and he worked every day to be worthy of it. Alina saw it. She saw it in the way he showed up even when no one asked him to, in how he made time, in how he made no promises he couldn't keep. Her own journey hadn't been smooth. Forgiveness wasn't a single act. It was 1,000 tiny choices to look forward instead of back. There were nights she still woke up in doubt, but each time he met her with calm. No defense, no excuses, just presence. She realized that he had stopped trying to undo the past. He had started building from it. Together, they taught the children without lectures. They taught them by how they loved, by how they disagreed gently, by how they apologized quickly, by how they let silence breathe when words were too sharp. Kellen showed the boys how to work with their hands, how to listen, how to own mistakes. Alina showed Mirena that strength didn't always raise its voice, that forgiveness could be steady and quiet. And all 3 children learned, not from stories, but from watching their parents stand, side by side in the kitchen each morning, sharing glances, sharing time, sharing a life. There was no fairy tale ending, just a real one carved slowly out of broken beginnings and stubborn hope. One morning, as the sun set low behind the hills and painted the sky in gold and lavender, the 5 of them stood quietly in the back field behind their home. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Mirena leaned her head on Alina's arm. Lior and Elias nudged each other, trying to count how many birds flew past. Kellen slipped his fingers between Alina's. She didn't let go. She never would again. If this story moved you, if you believe redemption is real, then don't forget to like, subscribe, and share Mr. Ross' story trail. Someone out there might be waiting for a second chance, and maybe just maybe, this story is the nudge their heart needs. Some stories don't begin with love. Some begin with pride, with mistakes, with pain that no one saw coming. But what we've seen here, through Kellen, Alina, and the children, is that what starts broken doesn't have to stay that way. Kellen paid for his betrayal with years he could never get back. He lost the laughter of his children, the chance to hold them when they were small, the comfort of being loved before he understood what love really meant. And Alina? She found the strength to carry what he left behind, to raise 3 lives in the quiet shadows of disappointment, to build something beautiful with nothing but her bare hands and a promise to protect their joy. But the most powerful thing she did? She forgave, not quickly, not easily, but fully, and that changed everything. This story isn't about perfection. It's not about a clean ending or an instant fix. It's about the choice to show up after you've failed. It's about the quiet work of rebuilding trust. And it's about what happens when 2 people decide to be better, not just for each other, but for the future they might still have. Love, in its strongest form, doesn't come from pretending nothing went wrong. It comes from learning how to make things right. So if you're watching this and holding on to something, an old mistake, a missed chance, a wound someone else left behind, remember, redemption is possible. Forgiveness is powerful. And second chances, when handled with care, can lead to something far more lasting than first impressions ever could. And maybe your story isn't over yet. Maybe it's just beginning again. So whether you came here tonight by accident, by curiosity, or because something in you needed this, thank you. You're not alone on the trail. More tales of love, loss, and lessons are on the way. Stories that heal, stories that reveal, stories that remind us why we keep hoping. Because no matter how far someone falls, there's always a road back if they're willing to walk it.